You're a terrible person and a terrible reporter. As far as the Epstein files is, I have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. I threw him out of my club many years ago because I thought he was a sick pervert. And I guess I turned out to be right. But you know who does have? Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, who ran Harvard, was with him every single night, every single weekend. They lived together. They went to his island many times. I never did. Andrew Weissman, I hear. All these guys were friends of his. You don't even talk about those people. You just keep going on the Epstein files. And what the Epstein is a Democrat hoax to try and get me not to be able to talk about the $21 trillion that I talked about today. It's a hoax. Now, I just got a little report, and I put it in my pocket, of all the money that he's given to Democrats. He gave me none, zero, no money to me. But he gave money to Democrats. And people are wise to your hoax. And ABC's, your company, your crappy company, is one of the perpetrators. And I'll tell you something.
Okay, so something absolutely wild is happening right now inside the White House. President Trump has reportedly been screaming in the Oval Office after suffering a brutal series of Capitol Hill setbacks that have completely shattered his image of total control over Congress. We're talking about a full-on meltdown week where everything went wrong at once. Trump was forced to sign the Epstein files bill he'd spent months trying to block. His attempt to push a $2,000 stimulus check gambit flopped with his own Republicans. Party leaders quietly distanced themselves from his most aggressive demands. And to top it all off, Democrats swept a wave of off-year election victories that Trump couldn't spin away, no matter how hard he tried. Insiders are describing scenes of rage and frustration as Trump realizes something terrifying. His grip on the party he remade is way weaker than it looks. The man who's supposed to command absolute loyalty from Republicans just watched his own party defy him, ignore his preferences, and quietly start planning for a future where they don't need him anymore. Can you believe this is happening? The strong man who's supposed to snap his fingers and have everyone jump just got humiliated by members of his own party, and now he's reportedly losing it behind closed doors while trying to pretend everything is fine in public. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
I think the license should be taken away from ABC because your news is so fake and it's so wrong. And we have a great commissioner, the chairman, who should look at that, because I think when you come in and when you're 97% negative to Trump and then Trump wins the election in a landslide, that means obviously your news is not credible and you're not credible as a reporter. So I've answered your question. You should go and look at the Democrats who received money from Epstein, who spent their time. Larry Summers was with him all the time. That creep, the fund guy, was with him all the time. What's his name?
Reid Hoffman.
Who? Reid Hoffman. I don't know Reid Hoffman, but I know he spends a lot of money on the radical left. Reid Hoffman, in my opinion, should be under investigation. He's a sleazebag. And those are the people, but they don't get any press, they don't get any news, and you're not after the radical left because you're a radical left network. But I think the way you ask a question with the anger and the meanness is terrible. You ought to go back and learn how to be a reporter. No more questions from you. Who else has a question?
Let me break down what happened, because the cumulative effect of these setbacks is devastating for Trump's political position. First, there's the Epstein files disaster. As we've covered, Trump spent months trying to kill or water down the bill that would force the DOJ to release Jeffrey Epstein's records. He called it a hoax. He had allies block votes. He did everything he could to prevent this release from happening. And then his own party revolted. The House passed the bill 427-1. The Senate gave unanimous consent, and Trump had to sign it, completely capitulating on an issue he'd been fighting for months. Bloomberg and Fortune are reporting this as a clear sign that Trump's grip on the party has weakened. He couldn't stop a bill that 427 members of Congress supported, even though he desperately wanted to. That's not control. That's not dominance. That's getting steamrolled by your own side and having to pretend you were for it all along. But the Epstein humiliation wasn't even the worst part. GOP senators, led by John Thune, refused to do what Trump and Speaker Johnson wanted on this bill. The White House and Johnson were pushing for redaction carve-outs and liability protections that would have weakened the transparency requirements. They wanted senators to water down the bill before passing it, and the Senate said no. They chose to rush the bill through as is, without the changes Trump wanted, in what can only be described as a striking show of independence from Trump's preferences. Think about what that means. Republican senators looked at what Trump and his allies in the House leadership wanted, and they decided to ignore it. They decided their own political interests, being seen as pro-transparency on Epstein, mattered more than doing what Trump asked. That's not the behavior of a party that's scared of crossing the president. That's a party that's starting to make independent calculations about what's good for them regardless of what Trump wants. Then there are the election results that landed like a bomb on the Republican Party. The off-year elections on November 5th delivered what Reuters called a rare setback for Trump. Democrats swept key races just 1 year after Trump's re-election. They used voter anger over prices and the government shutdown to notch big wins in Virginia, New Jersey, and local races across the map. This wasn't supposed to happen. Trump was supposed to have coattails. His popularity was supposed to help Republicans win, even when he wasn't on the ballot. Instead, Democrats are basking in electoral victories that suggest Trump's political magic doesn't transfer to other candidates the way it used to. Voters who might support Trump personally aren't showing up for generic Republicans, and voters who are angry about Trump's chaos are actively punishing Republican candidates in competitive races. That's a terrifying pattern heading into 2026, when Republicans will need to defend seats without Trump at the top of the ticket. The New York Times is now reporting that congressional Republicans are beginning to look beyond Trump. That's extraordinary language for a party that's supposedly completely dominated by one man. Members are quietly questioning whether tying themselves to Trump's legal fights, shutdown brinkmanship, and culture war crusades is actually a winning strategy heading into the midterms. They're watching the election results. They're seeing the Epstein revolt succeed. They're noticing that when they defy Trump, the sky doesn't fall, and they're starting to wonder if the old fear of crossing him doesn't work the way it used to. Trump can still command headlines. He can still dominate the news cycle, but his ability to command Republicans to make them do what he wants, even when it's against their interests, that's clearly fraying. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into exactly what happened this week, why these setbacks are so significant, how Republicans are responding to Trump's weakened position, and what this means for the battles ahead on tariffs, Ukraine, impeachment, and the 2026 elections. Let's break it down. All right, so let's get into the details of what happened this week and why it represents such a significant shift in Trump's relationship with his own party. The Epstein files fight is really the centerpiece of this story because it's the clearest example of Trump being unable to stop something he desperately wanted to stop. For months, Trump and his allies treated the Epstein files release as something to be blocked, delayed, and watered down. They called it a Democrat hoax. They had Speaker Johnson use procedural tricks to prevent votes. They tried to frame transparency on Epstein as somehow anti-Trump rather than pro-accountability. The strategy was clear. Make this issue go away without having to release documents that might embarrass powerful people, and then the strategy collapsed. A discharge petition threatening to force a vote gathered so much Republican support that Trump had to reverse course and pretend he'd been for transparency all along. The House vote was 427-1, essentially unanimous, and when it got to the Senate, things got even worse for Trump because senators refused to play along with the White House's damage control efforts. The Senate dynamics are really important to understand here. Speaker Johnson and the White House were pushing for amendments that would have added redaction provisions and liability carve-outs to the Epstein files bill. These changes would have given the administration more control over what actually got released and would have protected certain people from potential legal exposure. It was a last-ditch attempt to water down the transparency requirements, even after the House had voted overwhelmingly for full release, but Senate Republicans led by John Thune rejected that approach. They chose to fast-track the House bill as is, without the changes Trump wanted. They rushed it through with unanimous consent, making it clear they weren't interested in doing Trump's bidding on this issue. Bloomberg and Fortune are describing this as a striking show of independence from Trump's preferences. That's not normal Republican behavior under Trump. Usually, if the White House wants something, Senate Republicans find a way to deliver. But on Epstein, they looked at what Trump wanted and basically said, no, we're going to do what's politically smart for us instead. The significance of this can't be overstated. For years, the conventional wisdom has been that Republicans are terrified of Trump, that crossing him means facing his wrath, getting primaried, and ending your political career. That fear has kept Republicans in line on issue after issue, even when Trump's positions were unpopular or politically damaging. But the Epstein revolt shows that fear has limits. When 427 House members and the entire Senate decide they want something Trump opposes, they can get it. They can defy him and survive. They can make independent political calculations rather than automatically deferring to whatever Trump wants. And once Republicans realize they have that power, once they see that defying Trump doesn't automatically destroy them, they might use it on other issues too. That's what has Trump reportedly screaming in the Oval Office. It's not just that he lost on Epstein, it's what that loss signals about his control over the party going forward. The election results compound all of this because they raise serious questions about whether Trump's political strategy is actually working. The off-year elections on November 5th were supposed to be unremarkable, low turnout affairs where the president's party typically does okay. Instead, Democrats swept key races in ways that caught Republicans completely off guard. In Virginia, Democrats won races they'd been expected to lose. In New Jersey, Republican candidates underperformed even in areas that had been trending their direction. Local races across the country went to Democrats in patterns that suggest real voter anger at Republicans and the chaos associated with Trump's second term. Reuters called it a rare setback for Trump, but it might be more accurate to call it a warning sign of what's coming in 2026 if Republicans don't change course. The factors driving these Democratic victories are directly connected to Trump's governing approach. Voters are angry about prices, and Trump's tariff policies have contributed to inflation and economic uncertainty. Voters are frustrated with the government shutdown, which Trump has been using as a bargaining chip in budget negotiations. Voters are tired of constant chaos and crisis, which has been Trump's signature governing style. All of that showed up in the election results. And now Republicans are looking at the data and wondering whether tying themselves so closely to Trump is actually a winning strategy or whether it's dragging them down with voters who might otherwise be persuadable. The New York Times, reporting that congressional Republicans are beginning to look beyond Trump, captures this mood shift perfectly. It doesn't mean Republicans are abandoning Trump. They're not. But it does mean they're starting to make independent calculations about their own political survival rather than just following Trump's lead on everything. The stimulus check situation adds another layer to Trump's difficulties with his own party. Trump floated the idea of pushing for $2,000 stimulus checks as a way to help Republicans politically and demonstrate that he's fighting for working people. It was supposed to be a populist move that would boost Republican standing with voters heading into 2026, but Republican members of Congress weren't interested. They spent years talking about fiscal responsibility and opposing big spending programs. They weren't going to suddenly flip to supporting massive stimulus checks just because Trump thought it would be good politics. The proposal went nowhere. Republicans politely ignored it or pushed back privately, and Trump was left without the policy win he'd been hoping for. That's another example of the party not automatically jumping when Trump snaps his fingers. They're making their own decisions based on their own political calculations, not just deferring to whatever Trump thinks is a good idea. The cumulative effect of all these setbacks has created what insiders are calling a meltdown week inside the White House. Trump is reportedly furious, screaming at aides, raging about disloyalty, demanding to know why Republicans aren't following his lead. He's used to getting his way with the party. He's used to Republicans being too scared to defy him. And now he's watching senators ignore his preferences on Epstein, members question his political strategy after election losses, and the party start to distance itself from his most aggressive positions. The public Trump is still projecting confidence, still claiming everything is going according to plan. But the private Trump, according to these reports, is realizing that his grip on power isn't as strong as he thought. The fear that kept Republicans in line is fading. The automatic deference he's relied on is eroding, and the party he remade is starting to remake itself again, this time in ways that don't necessarily include following Trump off every cliff he wants to jump from. The implications for upcoming fights are significant. If Republicans were willing to defy Trump on Epstein, they might be willing to defy him on other issues where his position is unpopular or politically damaging. Tariff policy is one area where some Republicans have serious concerns about Trump's approach. Ukraine funding is another. Many Republicans support aid to Ukraine, even though Trump has been pushing for a deal that critics call capitulation to Russia. Immigration policy, shutdown strategy, and even potential impeachment votes could all be affected by this shifting dynamic. Republicans are watching each other. They're seeing that defying Trump is possible and survivable, and they're starting to calculate that maybe their own political interests should take priority over automatic loyalty to a president whose political magic seems to be fading. The 2026 midterm dynamics are also changing based on what happened this week. If Democrats can win races in Virginia and New Jersey with Trump in office, they can win races in swing districts around the country. If Republican candidates are getting dragged down by Trump's chaos even when he's not on the ballot, then maybe the safest strategy isn't to hug Trump as closely as possible. The old calculus was that you needed Trump's base to win a Republican primary, so you had to stay loyal even if it hurt you in the general election. But if Trump's base doesn't show up as strongly when he's not on the ballot, which is what the off-year election suggests, then maybe that calculus is wrong. Maybe Republicans in competitive districts would be better off establishing some independence from Trump rather than being seen as his puppet. These are the conversations reportedly happening in Republican circles right now. They're not abandoning Trump, not yet, but they're questioning whether the old rules still apply. Okay, let's break this down into clear points so you understand exactly what happened this week and why it's so significant for Trump's political position. Point number one, Trump was forced to sign the Epstein files bill after a near revolt in his own party, capitulating on legislation he spent months trying to block after a 427-1 House vote and unanimous Senate consent. This wasn't Trump graciously agreeing to transparency. This was Trump getting steamrolled by his own side and having to pretend he was for it all along. The margin of that vote, 427-1, shows just how isolated Trump's position had become. When essentially the entire Congress defies you on an issue you've been fighting, that's not control. That's a complete breakdown of your ability to command your party. Bloomberg and Fortune are explicitly reporting this as evidence that Trump's grip on the party he remade is weakening. That's a significant shift in the narrative about Trump's political power. Point number 2. GOP senators led by John Thune refused White House and Speaker Johnson's request to add redaction or liability carve-outs to the Epstein bill, instead choosing to rush it through as is in a striking show of independence from Trump's preferences. This is particularly significant because the Senate is supposed to be more deferential to the White House than the House. Senators have longer terms and more job security. They can afford to take positions that might anger the president, but even so, they usually find ways to accommodate White House preferences on legislation. On Epstein, they chose not to. They looked at what Trump and Johnson wanted and decided their own political interests, being seen as supporting transparency, mattered more than doing what the administration asked. That's Republicans making independent calculations rather than automatically following Trump's lead. Point number 3. Off-year elections on November 5th delivered what Reuters called a rare setback for Trump, with Democrats sweeping key races in Virginia, New Jersey, and local contests across the map, using voter anger over prices and the shutdown to notch big wins. These results suggest Trump's political magic doesn't transfer to other candidates the way it used to. Voters who might support Trump personally aren't showing up for generic Republicans. Voters angry about chaos and economic uncertainty are punishing Republican candidates even when Trump isn't on the ballot. That's a terrifying pattern for 2026, when Republicans will need to defend seats without Trump at the top of the ticket, driving base turnout. The election results are forcing Republicans to question whether tying themselves to Trump is actually a winning strategy or whether it's becoming a liability. Point number 4. The New York Times reports that congressional Republicans are beginning to look beyond Trump, with more members quietly questioning whether his legal fights, shutdown brinkmanship, and culture war crusades are worth the political cost heading into 2026. This is extraordinary. For a party that's supposed to be completely dominated by one man, Republicans aren't publicly breaking with Trump. They're not that brave yet, but privately, they're having conversations about what comes next. They're looking at election results. They're noticing that defying Trump on Epstein didn't destroy anyone. They're calculating that maybe their own political survival should take priority over automatic loyalty. The fear that kept Republicans in line for years is fading, and that changes the dynamics of every upcoming fight on tariffs, Ukraine, immigration, and impeachment. Point number 5. Insiders are describing a meltdown week inside the White House, with Trump reportedly screaming at aides, raging about disloyalty, and struggling to accept that his grip on the party is weakening. The public Trump is still projecting confidence. The private Trump is reportedly furious and panicking. He's used to getting his way with Republicans. He's used to them being too scared to defy him. And now he's watching senators ignore his preferences, members question his strategy, and the party start to distance itself from his most aggressive positions. That gap between public confidence and private panic has been a theme of Trump's second term, but this meltdown week seems to have been particularly intense because the setbacks were so comprehensive and so public. Now let's talk about what this means for the battles ahead, because this week's setbacks have implications that extend far beyond just the Epstein files. The cracks in MAGA unity that became visible this week could widen on other issues where Trump's position is unpopular or politically risky. Tariff policy is one obvious area. Some Republicans have serious concerns about Trump's trade approach and the economic uncertainty it creates. If they were willing to defy Trump on Epstein, they might be willing to push back on tariffs too. Ukraine policy is another area of tension. Many Republicans still support aid to Ukraine even as Trump pushes for a peace deal that critics call capitulation. The Epstein revolt showed Republicans that defying Trump is possible and survivable. That lesson could embolden them on other issues where they've been holding their tongues out of fear. The impeachment dynamics are also affected by this week's events. If Trump's grip on the party is weakening, if Republicans are starting to make independent political calculations, then impeachment votes become less predictable. Republicans might still vote against impeachment to avoid angering Trump's base, but if they're already calculating that Trump's base doesn't turn out as strongly when he's not on the ballot, the political cost of crossing Trump looks different. Some Republicans in swing districts might decide that voting against impeachment is more politically dangerous than voting for it, especially if the evidence of misconduct keeps mounting. Trump can't count on automatic Republican loyalty the way he used to, and that changes the math on every vote where his interests are at stake. The 2026 election dynamics are the biggest concern for Republicans who are starting to look beyond Trump. If Democratic wins and off-year elections reflect genuine voter anger that will persist into the midterms, then Republicans could face a very difficult environment. They'll be defending seats without Trump on the ballot to drive turnout. They'll be carrying all the baggage of Trump's chaos without the benefit of his unique ability to mobilize supporters. And they'll be running in districts where voters have shown they're willing to punish Republicans for Trump's policies. Some strategists are already warning that 2026 could be a bloodbath if current trends continue. That's why more Republicans are starting to establish some distance from Trump, not abandoning him completely, but creating space to run their own races without being seen as his puppets. For Trump personally, this week represents a genuine crisis of political authority. His power has always depended on Republicans believing that crossing him would destroy their careers, but the Epstein vote showed that wasn't true. The election results showed his support doesn't transfer reliably to other candidates. The Senate's refusal to accommodate his preferences showed even senators will ignore him when it's in their interest. All of those things chip away at the foundation of fear and loyalty that Trump has built his political operation on. He's still the dominant figure in the Republican Party. He can still command headlines and rally his base, but his ability to make other Republicans do what he wants, to govern through fear of his wrath, that's clearly eroding. Here's the bottom line. Trump is reportedly screaming in the Oval Office after a brutal week of Capitol Hill setbacks that shattered his image of total control over Congress. He was forced to sign the Epstein Files bill after a 427-1 House vote and unanimous Senate consent. GOP senators refused to water down the bill despite White House pressure. Off-year elections delivered Democratic victories that suggest Trump's political magic isn't transferring to other candidates. And the New York Times is reporting that Republicans are beginning to look beyond Trump, questioning whether his strategy is worth the political cost. Insiders describe a meltdown week with Trump raging at aides and struggling to accept that his grip on the party is weakening. The fear that kept Republicans in line for years is fading, and that changes everything about the upcoming battles on tariffs, Ukraine, impeachment, and the 2026 elections. So stay tuned, because this week's setbacks may be just the beginning of Trump's troubles with his own party. Once Republicans realize they can defy him and survive, they might do it more often. Once they see that his base doesn't turn out as strongly when he's not on the ballot, they might stop being so scared of crossing him. Once they start making independent political calculations rather than automatically deferring to Trump's preferences, the whole dynamic of Washington changes. Trump is still powerful. He's still the dominant figure in Republican politics. But he's not all powerful anymore. This week proved that. And the screaming in the Oval Office suggests Trump knows it too, even if he'll never admit it publicly. The strong man is showing weakness, and everyone in Washington is paying attention. What happens next could reshape the Republican Party and American politics for years to come.